So given how different the market is, let's also make as radical of a change in how we're preparing students for the market. It just makes sense. So Sora's take on this is because we are this service-based information entrepreneur economy, whatever you want to say, it's a figure it out world. The answers are rarely in memorization and execution over and over. It's about how can we work together to fully think through a problem or a set of problems and find a solution that will help people.
Hello and welcome to the rebelEducator podcast. In this episode, I'm talking to Garrett Smiley, the co-founder and CEO of Sora Schools, an online project-based middle and high school. In this conversation, we talk about how Garrett went about starting a new middle school and high school and what beliefs and assumptions about education went into its development and what the day-to-day of Sora actually entails. We also spent a lot of time talking about what actually matters in educating teenagers and preparing them for the real world. You just put up a billboard in Arizona. Tell me more about this.
We did. So this is a big symbolic moment, I suppose, for Sora, because we are almost 4 years old. And the first part of our history was focused on making sure the program was as good as possible, right? Creating a school, the scope of it is immense and it's extremely complicated. So we didn't want to do the whole Silicon Valley move fast and break things. That was not the ethos we wanted for the company. So instead, we took a community designed approach with our initial families, and we made sure that we were designing something truly impactful before we tried to scale it. So this is the moment, starting this school year, that we feel we have created something special and truly transformative in many ways. And so it's almost our moral obligation not to get too high in the clouds now to try to scale this experience we've created and help many, many, many more kids from the US now, or at least US-based time zones, but hopefully sooner rather than later, the whole world.
That's amazing. So you're putting up a billboard, which I think is so, like, that must feel really awesome, right? To be able to say, I bought a billboard somewhere, like that has to feel really cool. What else are you doing with this big marketing push? Like, what is the vision for getting the word out?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of things. We brought on an incredible head of marketing. Her name's Sarah Baskin. And she's just bringing a level of sophistication and rigor that we didn't have before because it wasn't the focus of the company. But we're thinking about it from the ground up. How do we tell a story that you are also deeply invested in getting out, that the education system really needs an update, right? We need the next iteration of school. And we, of course, we're biased, but we think we have landed on something that could truly become that school 2.0, right? That, I guess, school 3.0 or 4.0 would be more accurate, but the future of school. So we just want to get the word out, let people know that there is another option.
Can you really quickly, to frame the conversation, give the short elevator pitch for what Sora is and how it works?
Of course. So Sora is an innovative online middle and high school. We do a lot of things differently. We are interdisciplinary, so our students are learning not in the context of like chemistry or European history. They're learning in the context of questions in the real world that they find fascinating, like the physics of sharks, or how to stop climate change, or the life and math of ancient Greece, or something like that. So there are things that the students authentically find fascinating. And I will circle back to that for the third pillar. The second is mastery-based. So we deeply believe we actually have a very unique grading system that is somewhere between like mastery-based and competency-based. But really what it means is each of our students is demonstrating their mastery over what we call units and abilities. Units are the content knowledge that you would expect students to learn in high school. And then abilities are things that we think are even more important, but most schools don't pay attention to, like teamwork, public speaking skills, a bunch of different things that you're able to do, not that you know, right? But the difference in Sora is we are having our students progress from 0 to 4 in each of these things, but the order, we don't really care. So we have some dependencies. Of course, you can't learn quantum mechanics before you learn algebra. That would be silly. But we want to really give the students the agency to craft their journey and choose the learning experiences that are most exciting and challenging for them personally, given their own unique knowledge fingerprint, sometimes I call it, right? And the last one is something I alluded to in the first two of those pillars, which is this agency-based education, the student-driven education. Every student at Sora is progressing through a unique program because we have hundreds, literally hundreds, almost thousands at this point, learning experiences that are interdisciplinary and that address those units and abilities. But it's up to students and their advisors to craft a story. Here's where I want to get. Here's what I find to be exciting and challenging. Here's my budding worldview, what I find to be important and beautiful in the world, and making sure their education is addressing those things instead of this standardized path that every student in the traditional system has to march through without knowing why they're doing it, right? Most kids are just motivated because they are threatened into caring, not because they find learning to be, this beautiful exercise of learning more about the world, right?
We'll delve a lot more as we go into the specifics of each of these pillars. I have a lot of questions for you about each of these. And I think you and I are very aligned in our overall philosophy around how education works. So I'm excited to dive into some of the nuances here about how you're thinking about it, what you've learned through your experiences, how you're approaching this at Sora. But I'd love to address first what I think is often a really big elephant in the room when talking about online education, which is the fact that most people have no idea what online education is or how to differentiate it from like the online version of public school, because what you're doing, it's a totally different world. But I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding that. And I think COVID was both it had a silver lining in that it made the idea of online school a lot more normalized, but people also saw online school through the lens of basically Zoom classrooms, just mimicking what you do in traditional school. And what you guys are doing is totally different. How do you describe the type of online school that you are building, which is this very new and innovative thing that most people have probably never even dreamed about before?
It's a fantastic question. And to go back to your marketing question, this is at the heart of the story we're trying to tell, is there are two elements to it. First is that Sora is fundamentally a new model for how schools should work. It's a pedagogical innovation more than anything that just so happens to be online from that perspective, right? So we want students to buy into learning to be interdisciplinary, mastery-based, and guided by your students' own personal agency and narrative, right? Like those are the three pillars pedagogically that we want parents to buy into. And then we have this whole other thing, which is, and we're online. And this is not the Zoom school, of course, because the first things that I said, this is not the Zoom school you came to know during COVID. It's something fundamentally different. And if you're intentional about it, we've been building online first for 4 years. Before COVID, everyone's telling us we were crazy, right? But what we told people is online is a superpower for a few different reasons. I'll just name a few off the top of my head. One is that it opens up the community of learners, right? School is no longer the people who live a 5, 10, 15-mile radius around a campus. Now it can be like a global substrate of people who are fascinated about pushing themselves and learning about the same things. And we can connect people no matter where they're based, right? So just opening people's eyes to the world and making sure that students are connected based on interest, not geography, right? That's a huge one. Might I say also, we have known for a long, long, long time, right? This is why busing was a thing, that students need diverse friend groups. They need a perspective on the world that is not their little community school, right? It is the most effective way to make people identify as global citizens, not just citizens of this neighborhood that hates everyone else, right? So just having that global perspective is so important, and online school can do it better than any other school. I'm willing to stand by that. Another one similar to that is we can get educators. We can get educators from anywhere in the world, right? Let's hear about the history of Islam, not from a professor or not from a teacher in rural Alabama who read about it. Let's go get someone to speak from Dubai about what it means, like in the history today, and also how it evolved to get there. So we can just tap these resources from anywhere on the globe. That's why the global community aspect is so important. And the second is just the nature of computers. We can optimize the learning experience in ways traditional schools can't even imagine. So for example, all of our educators, I think Sora is the best place on the planet for an educator to get to perfect their craft, because we can do things like we have all of our classes, they're analyzed for teacher talk time, which questions elicited the largest response. We can see if this student engages less in physics class, in physics related expeditions than humanities, and perhaps we need to crush some self-limiting beliefs with their advisor that they're not good at humanities or whatever, right? So we can just passively track so much of the learning experience that we can move these dials and perfect in ways that one teacher evaluation, one or two a year, where the teacher's on their best behavior and it's not really representative of the class experience, is never going to be able to compete, right? So online environments, this analog to digital transition, much like what we saw with the camera, with solar panels, with all these technologies, it allows much, much, much faster iteration and innovation. So those two elements. And then what I tell people is Sora, being just this unique pedagogy and this education engine that's being built online, will eventually be able to go into any form factor. If online is not the best thing for your family, and we can talk through what I think is a telltale sign that online is a great thing for your family, but if it's not, there's no reason why the Sora ethos engine can't revolutionize school in any form factor, in person, hybrid, whatever, right?
How do you tell if online's the best option for a family? What is the process that you go through or talk through with somebody to figure that out?
Yeah, I usually liken it to since we've also been a remote company for over 4 years, even before COVID, I liken it to that decision process. If you are a family who is perhaps not super plugged into your community, you don't travel much, you have very structured jobs with limited, childcare options or whatever, an in-person everyday school might be the best place for you. The same way that if those things are true for you as an employee, maybe an office is an awesome thing for you, right? But if you'd prefer an untethered lifestyle with lots of time to think and tinker, and then there's a bunch of other things too without me. We have a full battery of questions and process we go through with our families. But if those things are true, it's highly likely an online school or a remote job would be awesome for you, right? I think the future is going to be Sora has innovated this powerful pedagogy that makes students embody these mindsets we care about, growth mindset, creativity, the whole portrait of graduate we have at Sora, but it can go into any form factor, I'll say again, that fits the family's lifestyle, right? So we're starting with the online one, but spoiler alert, we are going to the other ones quickly.
I love that. And I think there's so much room for schools like yours to grow so quickly in that arena that gets so wide open and the world is so ready for it. And I think a lot of what you're doing, the world's been ready for it for a while. And it feels like this huge quantum leap from what school was or has been up until now. But school has also been so outdated that really you're bringing school into the 21st century and saying, no, we have all these capabilities to have kids meet each other from all over the world, to have the best experts in each subject without the geographic centralization, come in and teach our kids. It's really exciting how much is possible in this space and to see how much of that you're already harnessing. Do you have examples that you've seen of kids who wouldn't have had access to a large network or friends that share similar interests because they're in a more contained geographic or a more limited geographic region, that have been able to tap into really great communities or make really powerful friendships because they're in school online? I feel like those stories are so compelling for people to hear. And I imagine you've seen quite a bit of that in the 4 years that you've been running Sora.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have the stories of the rural families who this is now like perhaps even the first learning community they've ever joined and felt, a sense of belonging. And, we have those stories, many, many of those stories. But something I'll highlight is, much to my surprise, actually, Sora is not a school for rural kids. So actually, the vast majority of students are coming from the suburbs and a smaller percentage from the city, but it's really a school for anyone who thinks that this is a better way to educate their students. A shift that we've made in recent years, perhaps the last 15 months, is focusing on a few geographies. This is why if any of the listeners go through our application process, we will work with anyone in proper time zones, but we really prefer students to be based in our 3 geographies, which is Phoenix, Austin, and Atlanta. And the reason why is because we started in Atlanta and we saw beautiful emergent properties from that, such as families organizing dinners every week and students hanging out at coffee shops doing their work. And we even saw, students go on field trips and start dating each other. Don't say, I didn't say that. But all of these awesome things that we see in high school, right? We saw all of these things emerging. And it's only getting more and more powerful as we get density in these areas, right? Yeah, I forget the original question, but that's a fascinating thing we've observed recently.
That definitely hits the question. What about parents? I feel like there's a lot of pushback from parents. I get this a lot anyway. When I'm promoting online schools through rebelEducator, I get a lot of pushback from parents who say something along the lines of, well, I can't stay home with my kids all day. And I know that's a little bit different when you hit middle school and high school and kids are more independent. They can be on their own. But it's like still parents don't necessarily want to just have their kids home alone all day, unsupervised, left to their own devices. Do you get a lot of questions about that or a lot of pushback to that? Is there something that you tell parents about like how online school is going to fit into this landscape where the reality for a lot of people is that they still need some form of childcare throughout the day?
That's exactly right. And that's why Sora isn't an elementary school right now. We have lots of interest to go younger than 6th grade, but it's not something we've felt super good about. And the reason why is because the thing that you just said is truer the younger you get, right? You need more support. It's actually a spectrum all the way from infancy, maximum support, maximum scaffolding, if you're going to be a nerdy educator, all the way to high school, where they really are little people that can take care of themselves. So we focus on this 6th grade to 12th grade spectrum for that exact reason. It's just the middle school component has more, much more scaffolding academically, but also we require a little more hand-holding from the parents. So we talk about something called progressive independence at Sora, which I think me coming from more, my entry into the progressive education space was more in the self-directed learning, the unschooling world. And after many years of playing with that, it just became super clear to me that these are developed skills. I've heard people refer this as the cognitive maturity fallacy. So believing that these hard-earned cognitive achievements, such as executive functioning and self-direction, all this, it takes a while to be nurtured. And if it's not happening in the home very systematically, very intentionally, it's likely that in 6th grade or high school or college or even early adulthood, it depends if you've had a chance to practice it yet, it simply will not be developed to the point where you can plop a student down and say, take the reins of your life. So at Sora, we deeply believe in getting people to that point almost as design criteria. Like, this is the purpose of education, to get students to this point of independence, but recognizing they're not going to be there right when they join us. But most schools, they take that and go, oh, they're not very independent. And it's no one's goal over the time with the student to develop that capacity. So every educator is just stuck with, I need to create more systems as the stress increases. I need to create more scaffolding. So it just creates this point where we're infantilizing kids and they're coming out senior year high school without any executive functioning or skills of independence, right? I'll take a step back and talk to the socialization bit, which I think was implied in your question, that's something we hear a lot of parents speak to. And I think it's coming from the right place. But I think parents need to step back and realize that the high school or middle school social experience was not the 10 highlights that they were thinking of when they reflect back right now, right? They're like, I want my kid to have all those high school experiences. And it's like, okay, which ones? Well, I want them to have prom and I want them to like go to the mall with their friends. They think back to like the highlights that they experienced over 7 years. But that is just not what the research shows school is actually like, right? Most students do not have that active of a social life. And I think schools do that intentionally, right? How many times do we see students sitting there for hours at a time without uttering a word because they're in these passive lecture-based environments? And really where socialization happens is lunch and extracurriculars. Like really and meeting up with your friends after school. That's where the bulk of socialization happens. It doesn't happen from sitting in school and class, right? So we just ask parents to be very mindful of that reality and ask themselves, are they able to augment that level of community focus with their family's lifestyle versus offloading that to the school?
Another point that I get a lot of pushback on Twitter when I'm talking about online alternatives or homeschooling, there's always that person who'll come in. It's always a different person, but there's always somebody who will come in the comments and say, but what about your kid playing a sport? What if your kid wants to join bands? Like online school's stupid because then your kid can't do these things. And like I have responses to that, but I'm really curious how, as somebody who's has an actual school and is selling parents on the idea of that school, how you answer that question.
Yeah, I think this is an unfortunate reality. I'll go very high level, actually. I'll get all of my thoughts out. I think this is an unfortunate reality of like American city design, honestly, that most kids are trapped in their parents' homes unless their parents are willing to drive them somewhere. So what we encourage in our admissions process is for parents to just be thoughtful about their current lifestyle, how plugged in they are to their community, how likely are they to actually drive their student to that club sport? Because the question under the question of those people on Twitter is, when I drop my kid off at school, I know they get school and then they do sports after practice. That's less trips for me. And I'm not condemning that. Like, I get it. Yeah. The convenience factor is there.
It's very real.
We should not pretend that you cannot sign up for club sports. You can do club bands. You can do everything that you want to do exists also outside of a school. And in many states, you can literally sign up for your school's program, right? If you don't have that access to in your existing homeschool or online school or whatever. So I really think the question under the question is, I'm not sure if our lifestyle can accommodate that. And I totally hear that. I really ask parents to be mindful about that. If they don't have enough extra time, if that's not something that they want to do, perhaps online school isn't the best thing for them, but it's certainly possible.
There's also the resource factor that I hear people, like the monetary factor of paying for things versus like if you don't live in a state or a school district that's able to cater to you as a family that has their children somewhere else. I hear that as a pushback as well. This is kind of a hypothetical futuristic question, but I feel like this is a problem that a lot of people are going to be solving for as alternatives to traditional school become more and more prevalent. And I'm curious what you see as like things that will emerge to solve this problem more and more, if you have hypotheses on what's going to evolve here.
Yeah, I have a pretty strong hypothesis that there are going to be two different classes of innovations that come to support the fact that homeschooling or alternative schooling is growing rapidly. So many parents are looking for something that's not the standard. If you want the standard, public schools will probably always be there. But most is the wrong word. Many parents that I talk to are actively thinking about their options now, which is something that COVID did for us. It really accelerated innovation. So we're seeing just multiples more alternative schoolers, including homeschoolers now. So there are going to be two classes of innovations. One is just unbundling the things that parents want. So this is sports, like you're saying. It's everything from individual subject curriculum to social things. It's literally any friction point that homeschool parents are feeling. And there's tons of different ones depending on the family's lifestyles and approach to education. There's going to be markets to address all of these. I'm unsure about the form of these markets and the scale, whether they'll be more national things, online scaled solutions, or if there'll be a large enough base of consumers to actually support at the local level as well. I'm not sure. But that's one class. Then I think the second class is what Sora is attacking, which is the value proposition of school, which is a bundled offering around a core philosophy or thesis. Right? Many parents do not have the luxury, nor do they even identify as having the expertise to design their child's childhood, really. They want to trust a like-minded community of people to help their student develop in ways they agree with, right? So I think that is what Sora is going after, but the other bucket will also thrive.
I think you're actually going after the more challenging bucket because it's a lot more emotionally challenging for parents to tackle this one. Like, sports are cool and people get very excited about them, but it's a little bit more of a take it or leave it thing when you're thinking about your kids' overall life success. Like when your kid's middle-aged, it probably won't have made that much a difference whether or not they played lacrosse when they were in high school. But the level of education that they got feels extremely important for parents. And this is something, again, I talk to parents all the time about this. And I remember my parents, I grew up homeschooled, and I remember my parents expressing a lot of uncertainty around homeschooling me through high school because my mom knew she couldn't teach me high school level math and high school level science. And I think a lot of parents really struggle with that. Like the cost becomes much higher of bucking the system as it feels like the stakes of getting things right increase as your kid gets older. So how do you address that with parents? And what kind of, I imagine you feel a lot of pushback too, as you're talking about your school and parents are saying, yeah, but there's this safe route over here that it might be kind of like the mediocre route, but I know where my kid's going to end up if they go to normal school.
Yeah, I think that is just a consumer education problem because I think it's becoming less and less true as the years go on. The market will be able, I'm talking about the first bucket, so the point solutions of homeschool is probably close to solving that problem already for the parents who are like, oh, I just can't teach my student math, right? This is the one thing I'm not good at, and I just really want but they're still excited about basically running a company, which is raising their child and doing their education, right? Not outsourcing any of it. Like it is that level of commitment, which I'm sure you experience in your life over and over, the sacrifices that your parents had to go through to make this possible. And I think it's a wonderful thing. But for most parents, that's not realistic. So what they're looking for is someone who says, here, I see your worldview, I agree, and here's what I think the solution is. And laying that out and then going, beautiful, I've not thought about it to that level because I do not have the luxury to do that. And I also don't have the luxury to get down in the weeds, educate myself, partner with my student this way. It's a Herculean task. So I'd love a partner to do this. I think that is the promise of school. School is not going away because that is the fundamental promise. And that is what Sora is going after. So what I hope to see, just as many, there'll always be more of those point solutions in the first bucket. But I hope also we have 1,000 different Sora-like schools that are saying, we have a different worldview. We have a different thesis on the best way to do this. And we're going to make decisions aligned with that. And there'll just be so many different, it'll be the right solution for anyone, right?
Can we delve more into that thesis? Because you mentioned the pedagogical innovations of Sora earlier in our conversation. And I really want to dive deep down that rabbit hole because what you're doing is very innovative compared to how most people even think about education, let alone practice it. What has that? I want to talk in a little bit about the process of how you got here, but I want to talk first about like just more detail about where you are and what this looks like in practice for you guys.
Totally. I'll give the simple version of our thesis and then we can grab at whatever thread seems exciting. I think the world is moving from, I'll take a step back and I'll say the traditional school system was reacting to a need, right? And I think where I am not fully accepted amongst many progressive educators is I'm willing to say that it was a high ROI investment for the time, right? But the time was hundreds of years ago. The world now is, it's not a world based on memorization or, all the things that made up of a quickly industrializing economy. We're now a service-based economy. We are a figure it out world. So what I ask parents to do oftentimes, and I'll do it on this podcast, is just reflect upon the demands of their job today. It's probably collaboration. It's much more collaborative. It's much more about open-ended problems. It's about thinking things through, gathering context, truth-seeking. It's much more that than jobs were even 20 years ago. So imagine how much further they are along than the initial design criteria, essentially, of traditional schools, right? So given how different the market is, let's also make as radical of a change in how we're preparing students for the market. It just makes sense, right? This is a common talking point, but I just want to lay the foundation. So Sora's take on this is because we are this service-based information entrepreneur economy, whatever you want to say, it's a figure it out world. The answers are rarely in memorization and execution over and over. It's about how can we work together to fully think through a problem or a set of problems and find a solution that will help people. That is what the economy is built on today. We can automate away a lot of the perspiration, as Edison would say. So how do you design a school to prepare students for that? I think there are certain mindsets or habits of mind that we should prepare students for. The first one that I'll start with is a growth mindset. We need students who crave the struggle because they know everything about them can be improved. They're constantly searching for the next, challenge, or they're always seeking feedback because they know that's where they're going to get better, right? So that's the biggest thing. I think schools and the way they do assessment, it encourages a fixed mindset where students are afraid to fail. They want the grade. Things are very high stakes. Instead, school needs to be iterative, which is the backbone of all creative and knowledge work, right? So I think that's the biggest one, a growth mindset. The second one is just having students understand the world. The world is all about finding meaning, what's important to work on, right? In many ways, it's the ethos of a liberal arts education. Let's teach students how to think, not what to think, how to think, right? So we want our students to learn in the context of the real world. That's why we have interdisciplinary expeditions. They're learning how to, build a solar panel. And that's how they're learning chemistry and, oceanography and all these things. They're not taking separate classes that turn them. I say traditional classes that are scoped by subject, that are meaningless, create brains in jars. They don't know. Sure, they know like this formula in chemistry, but I don't know why it's important or when I'm going to use it. And I'm probably have this Pavlovian association between learning and the fear that school created, where I'm never going to want to think about it again, right? So we're doing that very differently. The next one is people who can just audit their own beliefs, right? Someone who is a master of themselves, which is a high, in the clouds way of saying people who know what they want and can cut through their self-limiting beliefs, keeping them from grabbing it. So it's also aligned with agency. We want students who have a story in their heads. Here's what I think is important. Here's what I'm chasing. And they are actively crafting that journey. They're internalizing their locus control, you might say, instead of feeling like I'm doing this because I'm supposed to, or this is just what kids do, or because I will be, I'm being threatened with this grade. We want the meaning to come from within them, right? For them to be their own masters of their fate. So I just think those are some mindsets off the top of my head that are extremely important in students today. So we've just designed a school to over and over reinforce those things rather than the procedural, memorization-based, high-stakes work that traditional school enforces. I actually don't think it's that shocking or innovative or whatever. And perhaps this is more of a critique on how most people think about innovation. I have a friend who is an investor, and he says, what you have going for you is that this all makes sense, right? That doesn't mean it's going to scale. It doesn't mean it's going to, change the world in the ways that we're hoping. But what we have going for it is it matches today. Whereas the traditional school, what it has is cultural inertia. That's what it has, right? It's a product of history and tradition, not thinking about how things should be, right? So I actually think Sora is much more of an investigation of imagining what school should be today if we were to redesign it from the ground up, kind of unapologetically, and just leaning into the conclusions and hoping we win enough hearts and minds, right? I just went to a lot of different schools growing up. I was a military brat, so I went to 6, 7, 8, I actually don't remember. And each of them were very different. So it went from the hippie schools in Seattle to the very strict, prep schools in Texas to even online schools at the time, right? So, and then I did some homeschooling between schools. So, and I did a lot of independent learning, but I'll probably save that for a bit. So I just experienced all these different ways of educating. And it created this question, even in my young brain, like literally middle school, how can these classrooms be so different? Have we not figured out the best way to do this, right? It's been how long? Which one's right? So I got interested in this question from a weirdly young age, but more of like a passive, how can I tell my teachers what they're doing wrong because I'm a stupid little teenager kind of thing, versus an actual investigation into the best way. My first passion was physics. And this was the beginning of the YouTube era. It was like 2012 or whatever. And so it was probably a little later than that, but I was just pouring myself into these resources that were online. And then I just felt increasingly pissed off about the situation in my school, that I was sitting down and listening to teachers whom I didn't respect. That's another thing. It's another tangent we can go down. Basically impersonate YouTube videos, but worse, for the entire day, instead of just leveraging all of these world-class resources that were coming up and supporting us through them, right? So it just felt absurd being one of the first YouTube generations. And so that is what really kicked off my passion for education, because just going through that, it was blatantly obvious that it was wrong, right? We were impersonating videos with no engagement from the students, which is still, most parents imagine their kid in like a great discussion-based class. 99% of the time, that's not true. Their teacher shushes them and they don't take questions. That is the reality of school. And it's just so silly because you can do the exact same thing online on YouTube. It'll be better and the teacher can take a nap and it would literally be better, right? So I just felt that deep down that something was wrong. I carried this budding passion with me through college. I was just, something about me is I got very interested in nonfiction around like early high school. And I just started like absorbing as much as I could. And so this became a part of my reading diet. And I was learning about these early innovators, Dewey, Montessori, right? And I was combining this with my own lived experience in the classroom. And I just started to have some very firm opinions, right? So when I got to college, I did mechanical engineering and computer science at Georgia Tech. But even there, I had this built up view in my head about how great it was going to be because they're the best of the best. I'm sure they figured this out. And it was bad, right? Again, it was bad. And I knew the beginnings of an educational philosophy that would be better. And I was seeing it every day. It was bothering me so much. So I decided to put my money where my mouth is and start an education nonprofit where I could play with some of these ideas with some friends of mine in college. We started it together and we were just creating game-based, event-based learning in a very interdisciplinary way to teach concepts in financial literacy and life skills for Georgia's foster youth. But it was an exploration into how very progressive forms of education could take big, complicated problems on like that, right? In a very in an underrepresented, marginalized, whatever you want to say, community. And it worked, right? It worked. I saw it with my own eyes. So even then from a young age, even though I was young, I am young, just decided, let's see if we can create a school in the same ethos. And I've met my two co-founders who were also thinking about a reskilling venture. So they're deeply interested in education, coming from another company. And we just said, hey, let's do it. It's probably crazy. It's like 2018. No one's asking for this, but you just have that feeling that it's right. You'll be on the right side of history, but you don't know the timeline, right? So we just wanted to work toward it. It probably wasn't a good financial decision being a computer science person who could go work it. So I decided I wanted to live in my parents' basement and work on a school, which was crazy. But now I think we are seeing that we are right. Although we've iterated 1,000 times, the original feeling, the original hypothesis we had is playing out, even on an accelerated timeline. We thought we'd be 10 years before we're seeing this, right?
I want to go back to the pillars that you talked about in the beginning of our conversation, like the core pillars of your philosophy and that you're working towards with your students. How do you measure, or what is your definition of success when a kid graduates from your program? Like what are the benchmarks that you want that kid to have reached, or the capacities that you want them to have that makes you say, this kid has successfully completed this program, they're ready to go tackle the world, my job here is done?
It's a fantastic question. I think that's a question every school should ask themselves. And I know it's popular, people to call it portrait of a graduate, whatever, but people do not really rigorously think through that question. So I think there's two ways I could answer it. One is we do have academic standards, and I can speak to why that's the case. But so that's one way. We want to make sure that students are demonstrating mastery over all of the things that were in their plan. So that's both the base requirements and then also the extensions that they took based on their interests. I want to make sure they hit all of those. But that's not really your question, right? That would be the traditional school's answer to your question. But we want to make sure that across those pillars, it's almost like those are the adjectives we would use to describe the students. So we have some almost like test cases for how a student would think through approach problems that would exemplify if they have or haven't fully adopted those mindsets. But it's not something that I think we have matured as an industry or even as society, as science either. We've not fully reached the point where we can quantitatively track the development toward these things. I think I'm a little heterodox when I say that would be great. I think an assessment at large, the problem isn't assessment. This is where Garrett's opinion is coming. I don't think the problem in education is assessment is bad. I think it's that we have bad assessment. We're measuring like the 5% of things that are easy to measure and then pretending like nothing else exists is how traditional school does it. But it would be awesome if, and we're not even close to this, so much more innovation is needed, but it would be awesome if students could take a standardized test in traditional school that was actually an authentic representation of the portrait of a graduate we think schools should be preparing students to be, right? Having these mindsets, not just knowing whether 3 + 3 = 6, right? So we do have crude ways to try to measure this. And we have an advisor model at Sora that develops their social emotional learning and just builds a deep 4 to 7 year relationship with a single student. So we can track this and we give developmental feedback every cycle to families where we say, here's how we saw or didn't see them demonstrate this and how they can improve. So we are tracking it, but the quantitative aspect, I hope that comes sometime soon.
What, in an ideal world, what would you be tracking as the metrics for successful completion of like what we consider to be like your secondary education? And I know this is a challenging question to answer, but I don't know how well developed your philosophy on this is, but if you can take a stab at it, what should we be measuring that we don't necessarily have metrics for, but that are actually the critical things for kids to have mastered in order for them to be ready to go engage with the adult world?
Such a good question. I say at Sora, we think that the traditional method of solving that problem is flipped the wrong way. So in traditional school, what they do is they start with content. They hope you develop in your competencies. So they start with something like, when did the 100 Years' War start? I don't know, sometime in the 1300s. I don't even remember. But, and then they're like, I hope from that you're developing to like read history and like critical thought, critical thinking and all that, right? So it's like they hope it's a byproduct. And then they hope the final layer, which is how your mind works, these habits of mind, these mindsets, whatever you want to call it, they're hoping that evolves almost as like a tertiary consequence. It rarely happens. It rarely, sometimes it does, and you develop in some way according to it, but it rarely happens. So at Sora, what we say is let's flip that on its head. The first thing that we're doing, and even in design conversations at Sora, when we're making decisions about the program or whatever, we look at here are our pillars. Here's how we want our students' minds to work when they come out. Are the decisions leading to that? So everything that we're doing, even in the student-led conferences that our students lead with their families, we are speaking first to how they're developing to the mindsets, and then to the competencies. So like public speaking and collaboration, right? That's the competencies. We call them abilities at Sora to be more gamified, but there's the competency layer. And then we talk about the nuts and bolts of their math progression and all this, right? But first we want to put it in the context and we're doing this education thing to mold your mind to look like this, right? I'll speak to the reason we have academic standards at all, because I think that can be slightly controversial in this sphere that we both belong to. I just think there are such instructive things. Like, let's say, I guess most people would agree with this, but there are always people on the outskirts. I think it would be absurd for us not to override a student's autonomy to not teach them writing or reading or something like that, right? And I think the rough framework we can use is if it's informed consent, if the student fully understands the consequences of their actions, perhaps we can have a serious conversation about it. But I have heard people say, and then, of course, so this is a straw man in some degree, but I've heard people say, my 6-year-old says reading doesn't feel important to them right now. Like, they're 6. They don't really understand the consequence of those actions, right? And it is such an important skill. It'll help you no matter where you go, right? So we need to override. We do everything we can to explain the context of our decision and help them understand. But even if they don't get there, it's our moral duty to do that, right? So there are variations of that. At Sora, we say low ceiling or low floor, high ceiling. So we want our students to have all of those extremely high leverage learnings, both from like writing and reading, but also things like our students who are based in the US, caveat, should know how our government works. And that is just a high leverage thing. They should know how money works. They should know reasoning through math, like abstract reasoning, which is what math is. They should know some tenets of computer science. Like, it's not that many things, right? We are not drilling them absolutely on here's exactly what you need to learn. But there are some things that are so high leverage to know that we're going to make sure the student gets this breadth of content. So that anyway, but our high ceilings means what I care more about anything is that students are challenging themselves. They're authentically pushing themselves because they think that in and of itself is a goal and important. And then 2, they're doing something based on what they think is important. So we want them to always investigate, what do you care about? Why do you care about that? How are you going to change your journey to chase that, right? That's what we call our high ceiling. So perhaps they think marine biology is the most important thing, and they're just on fire about it because that's how motivation happens, in my opinion. People think something is deeply important and within their control. That's where the growth mindset, anyway, tangent. And then they just chase after it. So that's where the high ceiling. I want them to be able to become, expert if they want to, because they're on fire about that. But we can't ignore the floor of extremely high leverage things to know. Yeah, sorry. You didn't exactly ask that question, but it's a common one we get.
I think that was actually a really important tangent. And I think there's a lot of really important things that you highlighted here. I think the passion and the purpose element of a child's education is completely glossed over by traditional school, or it's painted in the vaguest and most one-size-fits-all brushstrokes possible. Like, I remember when I was in high school and I'd taken the PSATs and I checked the box that said that I wanted to get mailings from colleges. And then I started getting the mailings. I was like, why did I do that? And they all were talking about like, find your purpose, change the world. Like, it's such a cliche sort of motivational poster thing that gets batted around a lot in school, but it's never really addressed on a personal level. And it's so important because really you're only going to learn things if you're intrinsically motivated. Like extrinsic motivation really only works if it's leading to some level of intrinsic motivation. And the best intrinsic motivator is knowing that there's something that you're legitimately excited about and that you personally really want to do. And so tapping into that with kids is so important. So I'm really glad that we've ended up here in our conversation because I think this is a really key thing to address.
We could stay here for 3 or 4 hours. I think this is actually way longer. I can almost guarantee you. It is the most important thing.
At some point
we should. We should. It is the most important thing an education can accomplish, in my opinion. Having a student develop a worldview where they think that some things are important. You want to talk... Okay, it's mental. It's a slight controversy time. Apologies. You want to talk about a mental health crisis, which 100% is real. I see it all of the time being in the high school industry. It has gotten worse after COVID. The news is not fear-mongering. But here's what I think gets glossed over. People... Okay, I'll take the slightly less controversial route. It's something I think we can all agree with.
Controversy is always allowed here, though, for the record.
Okay. The research shows over and over a key presenting symptom, I guess we could call it, with people who feel depressed or anxious is an externalized locus of control, meaning they feel like they aren't in control of their own lives. They feel like things happen to them and they are like a boat in a turbulent ocean and there's nothing that they can do. That is terrifying. And can we think together, audience, how schools may be contributing to that? Of course they are. Students are told, here's exactly what you need to do by this date. And if you fail this test, sorry, no redos, and you're going to have a C forever. You're not going to get into Yale, and then you're going to be a loser, right? That is the story we're telling kids over and over. Where was the agency in that? Students truly aren't a part of the equation of their own lives, which is terrifying, right? And so that's one thing. And the second thing connects to what we were just talking about, so I should talk about it, is the purpose element. People do things and people feel fulfilled when they feel like they are working towards something that is important and working toward it, meaning they feel like they are an important aspect of something bigger than themselves that they feel like is important. It is essential for mental health. The research also shows that over and over and over. Do traditional schools do that? No. In fact, they do the opposite of that. So at Sora, I think the most important thing a school can accomplish, an education can accomplish, is having the students be able to answer what is important to you, right? And then just having that belief, that growth mindset that I can become better and better to those ends. Like it's within my control. I think it's important. I think it's beautiful, whatever version of important. And I have the capability to contribute. That is a huge win for an education.
How do you teach that to your students, or how do you help them get there, especially with your very customizable project-based approach to education?
Yeah. A big one is, I didn't talk about this that much, but it's a core part of our program. We have these interdisciplinary, we call them expeditions or experiences. So they're every 6 weeks, they sit down at their computer with, depends on their age, but either by themselves, with them and their parents, or with them and their advisor, which is an internal faculty member at Sora. They sit down every 6 weeks and they get a buffet of learning options available to them. I'm talking literally hundreds. And as we grow, as Sora, as we started this conversation, this is a big, how can we help a lot more students moment at Sora? So as we continue to grow, students will have thousands of options available to them in our custom LMS that we've built. And there's a recommendation algorithm, of course, because TikTok, whatever, but it's up to them to scroll and go, here's where my interests match what I need academically. And we ask them, why did you choose this one instead of the other ones? So it's just exercising that muscle constantly of the students. It's meaning making, them going, I did this because I think marine biology, learning about the oceans, is important because this, that, and the other, right? They're doing that many times every 6 weeks. And so by the time they graduate Sora, they will have made hundreds of decisions, not only for their academic journey, very literally and concretely at that, but also in the conversations with their advisor, where we're constantly poking at their worldview and SEL conversations, but also in their house and inside of the expeditions themselves, because we have a very Socratic method of education. So they have to speak and contribute to the conversation on these extremely weighty topics in the real world. So it's more the design of the program that's doing it more than anything. But then also internalizing their locus of control, feeling like they are in control. Sure, they can select that thing. But another very important point of Sora is that we are mastery-based and we are fully redemptive, which is a word that we use. I don't know if anyone else uses that, but you can always overwrite scores. If you quote unquote failed that, so we do believe in giving students numerical feedback. 0 to 4 is what we do everything on. And if a student got a 1 on that project, it wasn't great. They can always, and in fact, they are incredibly encouraged to redo it. So just that muscle of iteration, and it's not high stakes. Sure, you should always do your best, but if you had an off day, just redo it. The iterations are far more important than how you performed in this 2-hour block for a test, right?
Which feels much more adaptive to how the 21st century working world works. Like, it's not like you're working on an assembly line where you messed up how you assembled something and now someone's car is going to crash. And it's like, well, I guess you're off the assembly line. It is much more of an iterative world where a lot of at least the types of jobs that are native to the 21st century are extremely creative and iterative, where you try things, it doesn't work great, you come back, you try again. The world is a very redemptive place. So it sounds like a really powerful lesson to be teaching kids really early on. You mentioned earlier the concept of a knowledge fingerprint. And you mentioned it in passing, and I'd love to have you delve a little bit more into what that actually means and how you use that in your lexicon. But also I am guessing that it ties somehow to this process that you just described of how kids are describing what is important to them and why it's important to them, and then building this very unique body of knowledge over the course of their career at Sora.
It's great that you picked up on that. I do think it's something that makes Sora special. There are a lot of things that make us special, but I think this is one of them. But it's also something that is just so obvious. Most schools have not pulled it off, right? To my point before. What we have going for us is that it makes sense, but it's different, right? So how I think of a knowledge fingerprint, and I will say this is always easier to see than to hear, so it'll be a little complicated. If anyone's confused, go to soraschools.com, click our curriculum guide. But I'll try to explain it verbally for now. How you can imagine our assessment system is every student has, let's call it 1,000 to be easy, but it is a little more than that. They have 1,000 units they need to learn before they graduate, let's say high school. Let's stick with high school for now. And this is the things like the example I used before, 100 Years War, but it could also be like FOIL in math, or it could be stoichiometry in chemistry, right? These are the buckets of things that you should know before you leave high school. Most schools, what they do is they say, okay, you're going to take these 5-6 classes at a time, and you're going to learn linearly, you're going to learn this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and that's how they're going to complete the whole thing. In fact, they have to do that because allowing students to deviate, it would get far too complicated for them with paperwork or in their heads to go, has this student learned this already, or have they not learned blah, blah, blah? Like, it's actually mathematically impossible. I can show you the proof because I'm a nerd. It's mathematically impossible for them to accurately track all of that with paperwork. It would require paperwork that stretches from here to the moon, literally, for even an average school. However, that's what computers are really good at. So if we can separate this mindset that every student needs to be in 5 classes where they all march through the same curriculum in the same order, it's actually not necessary. It's an organization tool, right? For the vast majority of cases, it's not necessary. I mentioned this before, but of course you can't learn quantum mechanics before you learn algebra. Sure, there are some dependencies, but less than you would imagine. So if a student at Sora, they all come in. So here's the knowledge fingerprint part. They all come in at a unique point. Maybe if you imagine it like what's it like called, an equalizer? I don't know, with music. Like they have this way over here and this over here and this way over here. Like they are at a different starting point. We don't need to all reset them in the same place, because what we can do instead is just tell students, every 6 weeks, I need you to learn enough new stuff to graduate on time. That's what I need of you. I need you to learn enough new stuff to graduate on time. How you do that, I don't care. So we create all of these high quality learning experiences. Like I said, hundreds, almost thousands by now. But we tell them, just sign up for enough new stuff and demonstrate mastery over enough new stuff that you're going to hit your goals on time. I do not care if you're learning this exact subject in this exact way with all your classmates. In fact, that is worse, because you are a unique individual with your own starting point and also your own goals. So we have students who are, like we said before, low floor, high ceiling. We have students who are accelerating to college level, past college level in some subjects like biology. We've had that happen multiple times. And so their unique knowledge fingerprint will be way over indexed in biology, but perhaps they are weaker in writing. So they need to address that versus a student who's a really strong writer but struggles in biology. It's an opposite prescription. Why are we marching students through the same curriculum at the same time, learning the same thing to the same level? Plus, controversy time again, that is anti-diversity. I think most schools are like, we care so much about diversity. And I've sat through so many, and I just want to yell out, then why are we making every kid into the same person? It doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, that is a very apt criticism of the model. And I'm inclined to agree with you. And I think it sounds like you're doing something, you're striking a very elegant balance between the self-directed freedom required to raise a teenager into an adult that operates with a great level of agency, but at the same time having them within a system that is outsourcing a lot of the effort to design the process of getting there. And that's giving them the structure that they need and the social feedback and also the socialization that they need to go through that process well, which is one of the things that, like, being completely self-directed, it's one of the challenges that it presents, is it doesn't have any of those resources to fall back on. So it sounds like a really a balance that is very, it's something that I think a lot of people are looking for. It is something that enables both of those things simultaneously, and it's something that I think a lot of people assume are mutually exclusive, but they clearly don't have to be. How do you?
Can
you
I
said
speak
that
to that super quickly?
Yeah, go for it.
Super quickly. I don't want to come across like I'm saying a self-directed education or a traditional education or whatever is bad, because it's all in the context of your individual student. So I think for the vast majority of students, a Sora approach is the correct one. But I have seen self-directed education, unschooling, go beautifully for some students. I've also seen it be a horrific train wreck, right? So just make sure you are auditing your own beliefs as a parent, because having buy-in and support from a parental level is super important. But also, what does my student need? What are they excited about, etc. And then find the right program for them. I am biased. I think for 50+% of students, maybe a crazy statement, I actually think Sora is the right place. But it's on the families to make that decision, right?
Yeah, the families have to take a level of agency that is really easy to ignore when you're just following the status quo model. Like, it's easy to outsource the responsibility to, sort of, on not just even to the school, but on a cultural level. It's like, well, everybody's sending their kids there, so all of our kids are going to end up in the same place together, so it's okay. Like, there's this sort of implicit safety in numbers sort of effect that the traditional system has. But I think we've crossed the line where that's no longer possible. I think too many people are seeing the statistics and they're seeing the outcomes, and they saw what traditional education really is when their kids all brought it home during COVID. And I think, like, the ignorance is bliss phase is gone now. So I think these questions, more and more parents will be asking them. And I think you're well positioned to be, at the very least, a really powerful example in this conversation, if not the solution for a lot of parents. I want to delve more into the mechanics though, because you said you have hundreds of classes, but you're not even at a point yet where, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not even at a point yet where you have hundreds and hundreds of students. How have you built this library of options, and what is the balance between like more formal instruction type work versus independent, self-directed projects where the students are kind of designing their own track?
Yeah, we've had 150 students for a couple of years now, but that's where we've capped it. So we've tried to say, we're going to have one full campus. That's how we define campuses. And we're going to iterate with this group of families until we have something super special. And now, like I said in the beginning of the conversation, we're at that phase now that we want to have many thousands more is the current goal and plan. So we have had a decent amount of students. We have intentionally invested in curriculum development and creating our own LMS and all of these foundational things that we knew would be super important to make that experience special, even when the numbers didn't warrant it from the student perspective, right? So that's why we raised money in the beginning so that we could have a group of people just building for the future versus just the minimum amount of faculty we needed to run the program with our students. So we do actually have it's like 500 or something unique experiences now that we've created, and we're on track to making that over 1,000. And these are high quality, interdisciplinary classes. I wish we didn't have to make them. So I think education should just work this way, but unfortunately it doesn't. And as we continue to add more and more students and we add more teaching faculty, we call them experts at Sora, as we continue to hire more, we're going to have more people actively staffing each of those, right? So instead of right now, where students have access to a couple dozen live expeditions to register for, which are like classes, and then they have a bunch of async stuff that they can do with the help of a faculty member, but it's more asynchronous. Instead of that, it'll be, we have thousands of faculty members offering each, 3 or 4 expeditions. So now they have 10,000 live classes to choose from, all mapped back into their transcript and their journey at Sora. They can see exactly what they need, what they haven't. Everything will connect back to that, right? So the surprising thing about Sora, when you think about it, and with any online schools, as long as they buy into a similar ethos of us, the larger we get, counterintuitively, the more personalized we get, because it's way more likely we're going to have that unique class that's exciting to your niche interest. And there's more likely your future best friend is going to be in the school, because we deeply believe in peer-to-peer learning too, which is something we haven't spoken a ton about. So there's this flywheel from the startup world. There's this flywheel where as we get bigger and bigger, the program quality gets better and better, which makes more people want to come, which makes it cheaper because we have more peer-to-peer learning. So I think that's the flywheel. It's going to create the future. But for now, it's just about having a dedicated team to keep churning out those high quality things.
That's amazing. There's so many different pieces of this that I want to delve into in far more detail than we have time for here. We definitely need to have another conversation at some point about some of the specifics about this, because there's a lot here to unpack. But on a very high level, there's a very big shift in overall cultural paradigm and also like the individual paradigms of parents for us to be living in a world where sending your kid to a school like Sora feels like just sort of a natural default option. We're in the early phases of this shift happening. The way that you talked about 2018 being kind of early to be starting to build something. And it's like, we'll be on the right side of history. But the question is, when is that going to happen? I relate to that on a deep level. I've also been in the education world long before it was even as mainstream as it is now. Like, it feels like it's such a mainstream conversation now. It's so exciting. And it still really isn't in the grand scheme of things, but it's picking up momentum. But what are the biggest things that you feel like need to change in the conversation, or the biggest realizations that parents need to have on like a broader cultural level for something like, for some of the friction around putting your kid in a school like Sora to start to dissipate?
Yeah, such a good question. I think one is something that's kind of already happened, but I don't know if all parents are there. After COVID, is that as good as you think it could be? Like, there's safety in numbers, sure, but look at the average output, for one of traditional school and into college. Is that who you want your kid to become? Because that's statistically what'll happen, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you are trying to raise your kid to become? Is that your value system? So that's one. I think COVID has really created that. And if that isn't the case, know that this year there are probably 10x more options that you have than you did before COVID. Just because so many people are realizing this, there's so much more investment, both from like a human capital perspective and also literal money going into this problem. People care a lot about it. So just look what your options are. I hope Sora is one of them. And then the other thing is just infrastructure takes a bit of time to build, but I have no doubt that the inertia of this new thing, Sora included, is moving at such a rapid pace, and traditional school seems to be decaying. The intersection point is way sooner than most people think. It's like full feature parity, being able to provide a better experience for the average family. It's really close. And I would say a big part of this is the childcare part that you said. Like, that is an unsolved problem. But I think even in Sora, where we are investing in physical locations and some of these things for the families who need that, as soon as that is the case, I do not know why someone would choose a traditional school other than tradition, which will continue to be a powerful force. The same way tradition dictates a lot of weird things we do in the world, right? And it takes a while for it to change. But people who are aware, who are thinking critically, who are auditing their worldview and their beliefs and their parenting styles, I just think more and more year over year are going to be looking for something different.
I'm a chronic optimist, but I'm also inclined to agree with you on this. I think I feel the momentum shifts. Like I worked for Praxis years ago when Praxis was super new and nobody was talking about skipping college. Now everyone is, and I'm seeing the same thing happening now with K through 12 education, and it's making me very bullish about the future. So I think you're right that the shift is happening already, and we'll see it soon. But I also hope you're right, because there are a lot of kids to be set free and for their potential to be unlocked. What is the dream that you're working towards in terms of both the education landscape at large and also Sora specifically? You've hinted at this a few times over the course of our conversation, but I'd love to hear you just paint the picture of what it is that inspires you to get up in the morning and work on this, and what mark you're trying to leave on the education world.
Wow, what a good question. I think it's one, this chronic optimism that you have that I share. I feel humans solve problems. Right? We are the only thing that solves problems, that creates knowledge, whatever. Humans have nearly infinite potential for that reason. And it is being grossly underutilized in traditional school. And when people, literally any problem that you can think of, politically, socially, technologically, whatever, the answer is people who know how to solve the problem. Like that is the answer, right? People who know how. And that just requires a different type of student than the one that is filling factories and taking orders. And so really what excites me about education in general, and why I see myself, I'm young to be calling this now, but I just don't see myself working towards any problem with the same fervor, because it is a multiplier on literally anything you can imagine. Creating someone to create the 100x solution is higher leverage, right? It is the highest leverage thing that you can do. So that just excites me from a society standpoint, creating millions of these students, which, to answer the second part of your question, is the aspiration. We think we've created a system. Even from day one, we were thinking, what is something that could scale up to help millions of students? First, let's focus on the experience, but then keep an eye toward how can this change the world and liberate potential in the millions. And I think today, the billboard went up today, like I said, but we've been working toward this for 4 years. It feels like this is the first step toward societal transformation, which as a chronic optimist is unbelievably exciting.
I have a lot of empathy towards that answer. I tell people very similar thing about why I care so much about education. It's the beginning of everything. It's the foundation of all of it. And there's so much untapped potential. And we live in a world that's accelerating so quickly. And it's becoming a more human world because our technological advancements have hit a point where all of the stuff that humans don't like to do, we don't have to do anymore.
Yeah.
And so all of the things that are uniquely, deeply human that differentiate us from other animals and from past iterations of humanity, like those are the things that are left that we are uniquely tackling, but kids need that potential to be unlocked to be able to thrive in that world and not just keep up with, but advance that acceleration. So I think you're spot on in the way that you're describing
and to that point, I know it's supposed to be the conclusion, but I'm going to riff on that for a second.
That's fine.
I think most people are. Let's do the same exercise that I said that parents should do for their students. Is the average output of a traditional school what you want for your student? Because mathematically, that is where they are being pulled to, right? The same thing is happening socially. It's just like, look at the average person in this modern world. Is that what we're trying to double down on? I think most people, look at the numbers, especially after COVID, most people are not happy. So are we going to double down on the status quo? That seems pretty absurd. But much of what makes people happy is feeling that, like we've already said this multiple times, but they're connected to something larger themselves. They feel effective toward their goals. And anyway, they are thinking animal things. They are things of the mind, and everything of the mind, being the thinking animal, begins in education, broadly defined. So I completely agree. It is the answer to, it's almost a panacea to everything.
Yeah, it's an exciting space to be in, and it's an exciting time to be in the space. I'm very excited to see what the next both months and years hold for Sora. I look forward to our next conversation here. Definitely would love to have you back talking about the results of said billboard and marketing campaign.
That's it. That's all we're doing.
And how many kids you're reaching. So people listen to this conversation and they are now very curious about Sora schools and about you. And I would hope that most people listening to this conversation are at this point. Where would you send them? What's the best place for them to learn more about how Sora works and also to learn more about you?
Yeah, go to soraschools, plural.com. All the information is there. For me, I'm a bit off the grid, but I do occasionally use Twitter, like Hannah so kindly called me out before the call. So you can find me at GW_smiles.
Thank you so much for taking the time for this. We've delved down some very fun rabbit holes today. This has been a great conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely, my pleasure.